Hello and welcome to the Sampson Historical Study. I'm your host, Abby Sampson. I'm so excited to be here with you every Wednesday at 4 p.m. We have officially entered November. We made it past Halloween. And I have a new special guest, a new face here in the study with me this afternoon. I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
I'm Maddie. I am the shipping and receiving manager for Sampson Historical. It is so fun and I love it.
So you've been here for like 2 years, right? You've gotten, so you came with a little bit of history interest, but not a lot of 18th century knowledge, and have gained a ton of knowledge. You've been to Mount Vernon with us and all of that. So really excited to have Maddie here with us. She's here with us every day, but again, the first time for her here in the study. So the whole team is amping up for Cyber Monday. So you may have received your flyer in the mail already, detailing what our sales are going to be. Our marketing team's working really hard to make Maddie's job really, really busy come Cyber Monday. So if you haven't seen those details, check out our website and keep an eye on your mailbox. So Maddie doesn't know why we're here today, just know what we're talking about.
No, I sure don't.
She's asked me several times. I refuse to tell her. I did promise that unlike the last two videos, nobody dies in this one, so we are all good there. I know I promised Jacob last time, but I mean it this time.
Okay.
So we are going to start by talking about Lake Superior. So what do you know about the Great Lakes?
I'm sure you'll tell me. I know very little.
Okay. So we don't live near any of the Great Lakes, for the record, but Lake Michigan's at the very, very top of our state. But Lake Superior is actually the northernmost of the Great Lakes, and it is the third largest volume lake in the world. Okay. So it's huge. Yeah. It's basically, other than being freshwater, it could be a tiny sea.
Tiny ocean.
So it's massive. And so this is the northernmost lake, and it drains into Lake Huron. And we actually have a map from 1696 that we're going to pull up here. And you can see, this is in 1696. You can kind of see Michigan there, and then Lake Superior. Now, for the time, this is really pretty impressive, and on how accurate it is. It is a bit skewed on the size of the bodies of water, but I really love old maps. This one's really cool. So up in Lake Superior, you'll see in the kind of upper left, there's an island, and that's actually the Isle Royal. And so that is the second largest lake island in North America, and it was actually once home to a booming copper trade. But today it's a national park, and you can camp and visit, and then when that season is out, then it's kind of desolate. It's a reserve for animals, so that's pretty neat. But that all becomes important here, because we're going to talk about a mystery.
Perfect.
So, like any good mystery, we have several different key players, and these are all French names, which I don't speak French. Do you happen to speak any French?
I sure don't.
Oh, good. So if you do speak French, I'm going to go ahead and apologize early on. This will be rough, but we're going to do our best, and please be kind. So the first is Pierre-François Xavier de Charlevoix, and he was an explorer, priest, and author. The second is Officer Pierre Gaultier de la Vérendrye, which he's a French colonist, explorer, and he hunted for the elusive Western Sea. Have you ever heard of the Western Sea? Mm-hmm. You have? Because nobody found it. The elusive Western Sea. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then Jacques-Nicolas Bellon. And he's a well-respected cartographer who mapped a lot of the New World, which would be where we live today. And then Dr. John Mitchell, who has a nice, easy name. He's a botanist and amateur map maker. So all these are really are key players into this huge mystery. And this mystery is important because this is a mystery that eventually affects U.S. law, and for a long time.
Okay.
And just coming off of Election Day, and all of that. Honestly, this is about as close to politics as I want to get right now. But it's very interesting. So make sure you stick around to find out how this affected actual U.S. governmental law. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about each person. So de Charlevoix, And like I said, he is a Jesuit priest and an explorer. And he's commissioned to survey the boundaries of Acadia. So a lot of America was owned, there he is, but a lot of America, but the North American continent was owned by France at one time. Which is why you end up with like the Louisiana Purchase and things like that.
Right.
So this is located now, Acadia would have been located now where New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island are. So up in that Canadian region.
Okay.
And he had actually recently, that area had recently, a lot of it been taken over by the British for their colonies. And so there's a lot of contention between the French and the British, as there is for many, many, many years. They're not super tight. And the French are getting a bit touchy about that. They're like, well, that was kind of what's that phrase? You're trying to take what I've rightfully stolen kind of a thing.
Right.
And so they're getting a little touchy. And so they actually send him over to start surveying this. The French government does. They're like, well, we don't want you to look like a surveyor for us. We don't want you to look like a government agent. So we're going to make you sneaky.
Okay.
And they do that by having him kind of fly under the radar. He's sent with just a few canoes and less than a dozen guides. And he makes landfall in Quebec in September of 1720. So September, it's still nice and warm, but shortly after that, things start to get, once you get through, August and September, October, you get into October and November, it gets real cold up just there around the Great Lakes.
Yeah, just a little.
Little bit. I've heard there's something called lake effect snow.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard that too.
Which is super easy to traverse in a car, so I imagine it's just a breeze in, canoes with less than a dozen people.
Absolutely.
And so he spends the first 2 years of the 1720s traveling by canoe around the lower Great Lakes. So Michigan, Erie, right around in there. And then he takes the Mississippi River all the way down to New Orleans, which would be really cool.
Yeah.
That would be a really fun, it's a neat trip.
Yeah, I can't imagine what you would see.
Especially then, it's all untamed.
Right. Beautiful.
And so they're surveying that Acadian border, and that takes a backseat to another project, and that is the search for the Western Sea, which is said to be somewhere in the continent of Canada, but no one ever finds this Western Sea. And it's kind of a quick sidebar here. So it's a non-existent body of water that was said to lead from kind of the center of that Canadian area out to the Pacific.
Okay.
And that was important to France because that opened up trade routes for them.
Right, absolutely.
And they just lost a lot of this eastern border to the British. So now they're like, well, if we have this pathway, then we don't have to pay British tax.
Right,
we don't have to worry about these import fees and embargoes and all of these different things. We've got our own route. So it was very important to them, but did not come to fruition. So when the time came for him to travel to Lake Superior, he actually got really sick.
Okay.
And there was bad weather, and he ended up not going at all to Lake Superior ever. So that's important to remember. Charlevoix never made it to Lake Superior at all.
Okay.
And by the end of 1722, he was out. He was done. He went back to France. He published his observations in a book called The History and General Description of New France. That title was in French. I decided to use the English translation. You're all very welcome. And his editor said of the book, "There is no other source which approaches his journal either for accuracy or discrimination, and none which gives so good a description of the posts, the routes, the missions, the tribes, and the conditions in the Mississippi Valley during the first quarter of the 18th century." Again, he was renowned. He was a good explorer. He was good at his job. And upon his return to France, he was actually consulted on a different expedition. So he didn't ever come back, but he worked kind of as that consultant. And this was a specific expedition for the Western Sea. Again, it's getting more and more important.
Right.
And so this brings in Pierre Gaultier de la Vérendrye. I wish you guys could see how this is spelled. And so he was actually the son of a prominent landowner and fur trader. He was born in New France. So he was actually born over here on the North American continent.
Okay.
And he, in his kind of middle age years, joined his brother in commanding the Poste du Nord, which is an enormous area north of Lake Superior. Mm-hmm. So he's no kind of stranger to this environment.
Right.
And he's essentially local. And so that gives him a really neat kind of leg up on Charlevoix. But he sends a letter to Charlevoix and basically asks for his advice. What can you give me? Because Charlevoix's expedition actually ended 8 years earlier. Charlevoix sends him a letter cautioning him only not to get carried away and don't build too many permanent trading posts along the way. And he did that because he actually really believed in kind of the purity of exploration. And his fear was that this need for commerce would disrupt this true exploration of the New World. And unfortunately, by the time that Charlevoix's letter gets back, it's been a year he's been gone. He never gets the letter until he returns.
Okay.
And he actually goes ahead and builds a ton of trading posts. And they were all very, very successful. He consults native peoples and other locals to different areas about where to build these posts, and they do very, very well.
Okay.
There's nothing to kind of place this up for our view of history, our debate, to say whether that Charlevoix's kind of prediction came true. Did it get in the way of did commerce get in the way of this exploration? But I don't know, with the maps and things that we're looking at today, I feel like it funded exploration versus kind of ruined the purity of it.
Right.
If you guys are from any of these areas, please tell us, if you've seen these forts, what that looks like, and kind of what you know about what I'm telling you today. Especially if you're up in the Great Lakes regions. If you know about what we're going to talk about here, about the mystery that we're getting to, I want to hear about it. I'd like to hear the local lore. And so he did create these posts, and they became very successful. And so next, we're going to introduce, and this is going to be a little bit of a jump here, but Jacques-Nicolas Bellon. And he's a well-established, successful map maker. Like, prodigious map maker.
Okay.
And so he, at the age of 18, is appointed the chief cartographer for the French Navy. Wow. Which makes me feel like I should have accomplished more in my life up to this point.
I've done nothing.
But no, 18, he is the chief cartographer for the French Navy.
Insane.
And he's later named head cartographer for the King of France.
Wow.
So he went places.
Yeah, he did a lot.
He did the thing.
Sounds like he did good.
Yeah, he did a great job. And so he was actually commissioned by Charlevoix to create maps for his book.
Okay.
Charlevoix is an explorer. He does do some cartography, not to the level, obviously. I don't know if anybody does it to the level that Bellon does. And so he uses notes from both explorers to make these beautifully detailed maps. And we actually have a picture of one of the full Bellon maps. And here it is. And you can see it's even more, close to what we would think of as accurate.
Yeah.
But up there in Superior, you've got several additional islands now.
Okay.
Very large islands.
Yeah.
And so this has, detailed photography, or typography rather, and it shows the locations of Native American villages, all 5 Great Lakes and their tributaries, as well as the islands within them. And this includes an isle named Philippeaux. So if you see in the upper left of Superior, you'll see Isle Royal, which we had on the other map, correct? But now below it is a large mass, and that is Isle Philippeaux.
Okay, interesting.
So Isle Philippeaux is really the crux of this mystery. Okay, it's kind of appeared here, and it's what we like to call a phantom island. Now, history is actually kind of peppered with fabled islands. You have Atlantis, you have Avalon. There are even more localized kind of phantom island tales that appear on real maps, and one of them is actually called High Brazil, and it's situated off the coast of Ireland. And we do have a quick map of that I really like. I love looking at antique maps because you're about to see in a second. But it supposedly appears once every 7 years. And High Brazil, you see that sea monster with the double horns in the middle?
Yeah.
It's immediately to the right of that.
Okay.
And that's it says Isle de Brazil.
Okay, yeah.
But it's reported to only come around every 7 years. In 1674, Captain John Nisbet reported an island full of large-back rabbits and a magician in a stone castle.
Okay.
Odds are that this island never existed.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that sounds pretty cool. I mean, but...
I feel like he went back to his ship and he's like, all right, guys, we didn't find anything. What do we say? And so, one guy was kind of hungry. He's like, I could go for a rabbit right now.
I think that's actually exactly what happened. I think that makes the most sense.
But what if we added a wizard?
You have to add the wizard.
It
has to have that extra touch.
I think I'm going to come home and be like, I did not happen to find what I was looking for at the grocery store, but there was a wizard.
Then it just adds to it. It just makes
it magician. Better. A magician. He was a magician.
Right.
He wasn't a wizard. I apologize. And then you also have Bermeja in the Gulf of Mexico. Unfortunately, I don't have a map of this one. And that's actually first mentioned in 1539. And it was only recently taken off maps, like 1997.
Okay.
And so it was only recently taken off maps because it was first suspected as missing when astronomers started searching for it. And it was because it was the only piece of dry land that was supposed to experience a total eclipse. So they go around looking and they're like, I don't know where it's at.
There's nothing there.
There's nothing there. Can you imagine being the navigator on that boat?
No, I can't.
People have got to be saying, like, get it together, Jim. Like, are you sure this is the way we're supposed to go?
I would feel so much pressure. I would crack under the pressure. Really.
Honestly, that poor person has to stay awake at night for a while. They're going, it said it was right there. So in 1997, a survey is dispatched and the island's not found. They're like, it doesn't actually exist. Okay. So while High Brazil is probably a myth, in general, it just to come and go every 7 years, that doesn't make sense. Bermeja and other phantom islands probably did exist, actually. Okay. So with these really small islands, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, rising sea levels, tsunamis, sandbar movement, all of that can actually make islands disappear. Especially the really small ones. Mm-hmm. So Bermeja may have existed in between, tectonic activity, volcanoes, things like that. It's gone.
Right.
And so an example of that is actually in 2018, Hurricane Walaka tore through the French frigate Shoals and swept away East Island. The island is no longer there.
Wow.
So all of those are, it's very possible. So we think, why can't Philippeaux be real? There's one difference between all of these and Isle Philippeaux. Can you guess? It took me a minute to get it. Philippeaux's not in an ocean. It's in a lake. All these others are in an ocean.
Oh.
So the Great Lakes are more like seas than what we think of as lakes.
Right.
But they are freshwater, and Superior is the biggest.
Right.
In size, they're followed by Huron, Michigan, Erie, and Ontario, and they empty across the entire North American continent. And the water, if they were to actually take and empty out and dump them over the North American continent, it would cover the entire continent and be 5 feet deep.
Really?
In water, yeah.
That's insane.
That's
cool.
That blew my mind.
Yeah, I can't even believe that.
So the waves actually do rival the ocean, but you don't have that volcanic activity, the major tectonic activity, earthquakes that would swallow an island like Philippeaux.
Right.
So one kind of, so nobody actually dies, but so there's kind of a saying that says Lake Superior never gives up her dead. And that's because that the lakes are so very cold. At the bottom, there's not enough bacterial activity to cause anything to rise back to the surface.
That's fascinating.
And so there's a lot of legend that actually surrounds Superior, which I think is, if you guys have other legends that especially around Lake Superior, please share them with us, because that's prime for some folk tales. But so at the time we're kind of back to the crux here. Bellin was tasked with creating his maps. No single person had traversed all of Lake Superior. So there's a lot of unknowns still. And so here we have a kind of a small section of Lake Superior by Bellin in 1744. Here's a close-up of specifically Lake Superior on his map. Isles Royal and Isles Philippeaux. So it appears kind of cartographically for the first time on a landmark map in Charlevoix's book. And it's located midway between Isles Royal and Keweenaw Peninsula, and it's roughly 17 miles from either shore, according to the map. So if you look really closely at Royal, you'll see that Philippeau's almost a mirror image if you were to flip it. The borders are incredibly similar. There's a small peninsula to the side of Royal that doesn't exist on Philippeaux, but they're very, very similar in shape. And so, along with Philippeaux, Charlevoix describes in his musings some smaller kind of spectral sisters. So you have Pontchartrain, Mauropas, and St. Anne's. And Bellin has no reason to not trust Charlevoix because he's well respected. He, by all accounts, has done very good work. Except Charlevoix never made it to Superior. Disease, weather, kind of all these circumstances prevented his journey from reaching that far north. And so the farthest he actually went was Lake Huron.
Okay.
So he completed this rough map with only information he gleaned from others. And that really wasn't uncommon at the time to have people kind of place things together. And clearly it can be done very successfully.
Right.
I mean, we're looking at these maps that a lot are done on secondhand accounts, and they're recognizable, if not off. You can say, oh, that looks like this area. But what is strange is that without ever having set foot on the shores, Charlevoix himself discovered and named 3 brand new islands in Lake Superior. That sounds fishy.
He's really good.
Very impressive explorer. So, had this been the only time that Isles Philippeaux kind of made an appearance, it would be this footnote in history. That happens. That's how the Donner Party ended up with a whole new past. Like that happens. People either are misjudge an area, misinterpret something. They're dealing with a lot of different native peoples, and those accounts in that translation can get lost. Things like that. But that's not really the case is what happens here. But we're going to talk about why this is important before we talk about the very kind of finality of that. So why does it matter? This tiny island in the Great Lakes, why does it matter? And so on September 3rd, 1783, the Revolutionary War ends. Which, okay, that's a big deal, right? Well, 2 years prior, King George III actually sent British delegates to France to begin hammering out a peace treaty, which eventually becomes the Treaty of Paris. Which, then to facilitate negotiations between the American and British dignitaries, a map is needed. So the war is over. The Treaty of Paris is drafted. We need to decide borders. We need a map. And so they use what's called the Mitchell map. And so John Mitchell, we're going to talk about him for a second. He's not a map maker. Let's lead with that right there. So John Mitchell is a Virginia-born man who moved to Scotland to study medicine, which is not unheard of. Scotland had a very good medical program. He set up practice in Virginia and studied plant life in the United States in his spare time. And he became an expert botanist in his area. So he's a very smart man. And in 1746, Mitchell and his wife Helen moved back to London. Apparently, Helen wasn't in good health. They were living in a more rugged area of Virginia. So they moved back to London for kind of that ease and modern convenience. He was an adequate doctor in the States. He wasn't great, but he was good. And Mitchell really had no desire to keep up with that metropolitan pace and continue his practice. And so he kind of fell back on botany. And during this time, he made the acquaintance of the Earl of Halifax, which sounds very official. So Halifax had recently become president of the Board of Trade, which has a very important job because all of that just got severely disrupted. I guess at this time, you're not super disrupted by the colonies. You're coming off of some other conflicts, but they're expecting the next conflict. Things are starting to brew in the colonies, so they're preparing. And so, worried that the colonies are going to be the next powder keg, Halifax turns his expert on North America, that guy who lived in Virginia, who now is his neighbor. And so, John Mitchell. And so he commissions a map from Mitchell, and it needs to be extraordinarily detailed and highlight the British territories. Mm-hmm. Mitchell, who has never made a map in his life, says, okay, sure, I can do that for you, buddy. And so we have the Mitchell map. And he began it in 1750 and using those resources that he could find in London. Because again, he's not going back to Virginia. Mm-hmm. That's not really adequate on what he can do with himself. So Halifax sends out to the different governors and areas to gain information. Send me what you have, send me maps, send me notes on your territories. And that works. So somehow this man who is educated in botany and the human body and now makes this map that was incredibly influential and was used actually as recently as the 1980s.
Really?
Yeah. So in the 1980s, the Mitchell map was used to settle disputes over fisheries in Maine that were like ancestral waters.
Interesting.
So it's pretty impressive. Yeah. We're going to pull up an image of it here, but it was 4 feet 6 inches by 6 feet 5 inches, and it takes 8 sheets of paper to make. It was very expensive at the time, but other cheaper copies were published and printed. So this is the map here. You can see the 8 sheets of paper.
Oh, wow.
I mean, he gave it his all.
Yeah, it's very detailed. I mean, it looks like he did a pretty good job.
And one of the maps that he used in reference to make this, the Bellone map, where we find Isles Philippeaux.
So do we find Isles Philippeaux?
On the map we do. So in this negotiation, after the Revolutionary War, England's exhausted. They don't have a lot of money. They're in position to negotiate to get out of there. And so delegates from Britain and the soon-to-be United States in 1782, they sit down and they have this amazing amount of debt that they're trying to kind of assuage here. And representing America were some names you may know. Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, Henry Lawrence, and John Adams. And then on the English side, some names that we are not taught in school, David Hartley and Richard Oswald. And so to facilitate these negotiations, each side is given a map, a copy of the Mitchell map, and they are drawn on the borders and kind of what they want. So these are used for negotiations. And why is that important? Let's look at Article 2D of the Treaty of Paris. Thence along the middle of said water communication into Lake Huron, thence through the middle of said lake to the water communication between that lake and Lake Superior, thence through Lake Superior northward of the Isles Royal and Philippeaux to the Long Lake, thence through the middle of said Long Lake and water communication between it and the Lake of the Woods to the said Lake of the Woods. So all of that is talking about borders. And here's actually the last page where they signed the Treaty of Paris. So you have the different seals and signatures at the bottom.
Yeah.
But what this just did was write Isles Philippeaux as a legal boundary for the United States.
And they don't know if Isles Philippeaux is even...
They think it's real. They have no reason to think it's not. So they have no idea that it's not real.
They didn't look into that?
And, to be fair, it's not like they could fly over.
That's fair. Fair.
So this is now an official landmark between the United States and Canada. Now, let's not forget, Isle Philippeaux does have 4 equally fake sisters. The Pontchartrain, it lies across the lake and due east of Isle Royal and slightly above Philippeaux on the map. And now, it may actually have a counterpart in reality. It may be a mismarked island. It's actually similar in size and location to, and forgive me, and if you know how to pronounce this correctly, please do tell me. It's Michipicoten, Michipicoten Island. And coincidentally enough, that does not appear on the previous maps where Pontchartrain shows up as an island. So it's very possible that those two don't, or that one is the same.
Gotcha.
Then you have Mauropas, which is northeast of Pontchartrain. And it's long and narrow and sits close to the shore closer to the shore than any of the kind of phantom quartet here that we're talking about. And it's also been speculated to be the Michipicoten Island, but its location correlates more to the Slate Islands in Lake Superior. It's a kind of a small gathering of islands there. So again, entirely possible that is a misjudgment.
Right.
Then you have the Isle of St. Anne. St. Anne is actually south of Pontchartrain, and it's the smallest island of the 4. And its potential real-life counterpart is Caribou Island, which sounds really happy. Sounds like they celebrate a lot of Christmas there.
I would love to be there.
Who it shares a similar shape and size with. So all of these are possible. The major difference here is that there is nothing that Philippeaux could be. Because Royale exists on these maps as well. There's nothing that they could have been, oh, that may have been this. Nope, just out of nowhere. Right there. And so I'm gonna introduce you to a new character now. So this is the benefactor, the person who is paying for Charlevoix's entire expedition. His name again is Jean-Frédéric Philippeaux. So that sounds familiar.
All of a sudden makes sense.
Yeah, and so, but we go into his title here. He is the Count of Mauropas, and also known as the Comte of Pontchartrain.
Okay.
And his patron saint, do you want to guess?
Anne.
Yep, his patron saint is Saint Anne. And so all of those.
That makes so much sense.
Philippeaux, Pontchartrain, Mauropas, and Saint Anne. And so in the 1820s, surveyors set out on a mission to stake out this international boundary and realized it doesn't exist. They're following this directions that say through the Lake of Superior Northward of the Isles Royal and Philippeaux to the Long Lake. And that's the language exactly in the Treaty of Paris, that there is no northward of the Isle of Philippeaux because Isle of Philippeaux doesn't exist. So I think it's up to discretion here whether you think that Philippeaux was created on accident or on purpose. My personal opinion on that is that he created this as an ode to this benefactor of his, thinking it wasn't going to be a big deal. It wasn't going to be something that, lived on and became written into a law as an international boundary.
He played the ultimate joke.
He did. He played the long game on that one.
He did, yeah. It was worth it.
Joke's on us.
Yeah.
But, with that, I feel like too many things line up there that I don't think it was an accident.
Right, yeah. I agree.
So we do have some very exciting news, though.
Yes.
We are headed to the Battle of Camden in South Carolina, and we are not taking just the Sampson Historical tent, though our full tent will be there for those of you, and we're very excited to see you and to shop with you. We have an entire fabric store going with us. We will be launching a brand new setup.
So exciting.
It's so exciting. We've been working really hard to make this happen. Sampson Historical now has a fabric store where you can buy sewing notions. We've got lots of wool, we've got linen, we've got silk, lots of trims and ribbon and gold braiding and all kinds of things like that, cotton tapes, synthetic whale boning, which is great if you're doing any type of corsetry or making anything like that. And we're taking the lovely Chris, who's in one of our earlier videos. You can definitely start an interview with her. She's our head seamstress. Go back and check that out. and Molly, who is in our shipping and in our sewing department. Just kind of a jack of all trades. And we're so excited to be there with you in Camden this upcoming weekend. And thank you so much for being here with us. Make sure you like and subscribe. We have a ton of new videos coming up, especially with Cyber Monday coming. Marketing is getting very excited, and we definitely want to share those with you. So thanks so much for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day.